Maya, you said?
Maya Newsday.
And so the process is we will convene, we will send the video to the rest of our board. They'll review it in the next 48 to 72 hours. We'll have a little chat and we'll go from there. But today, I mean, I don't really like having a lot of rules, and I think you're both, obviously, civil professional people, so I don't think, we can have a good, intelligent conversation about the issues. I want to.
Not the Trump Clinton debate.
This is not what was going to happen in 2 hours. But I wanted to give you both the opportunity to introduce yourselves.
How long is this session?
Today?
Yeah.
Oh, I figure we'll go for an hour, maybe less. Whatever you guys can handle, we can always, just tap out. But I wanted to give you both the opportunity to introduce yourselves, explain to our viewers why you're running, what your issues are, and we'll kind of go from there. And so, Sandré, feel free.
How long do you want to?
Keep it brief, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, Sandré Swanson is my name, and I was born in Oakland. I went to Berkeley High actually, and went on to Laney Community College where I got involved in politics. I started my career working in the Shirley Chisholm President campaign in 1972, and that's where me and Barbara Lee and I met, and it was a great experience, meeting Shirley and actually traveling the country in support of her campaign. I worked for Ron Dillon for 25 years after that, and then I worked for Barbara Lee as her chief of staff, and I was her chief of staff during the war years and all those critical votes, and so I appreciated very much that experience. And then I went on to become elected to the State Assembly, where I championed issues around health care for children, education and safety issues for children. And I led the legislature in efforts to rescue our children from human traffickers. I did a lot of work for at-risk youth, developed a select committee on many boards of color, and we held hearings throughout the state trying to address those issues. So looking forward to the interview today. Thanks for inviting me.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I'm Nancy Skinner, and while I've had some roles in elected office in my 40-odd years living in the East Bay, what I primarily am is a social, economic, and environmental justice activist, and have been for over 30 years. And when I got elected to the Assembly, I took that approach, the approach of an activist, to my job as a legislator. And activists, the point of it is we're trying to achieve change. And so this is an incredible area to represent. It's one of the arguably the most progressive area in the entire state of California. And so I wanted to be able to deliver for our progressive constituents on the types of things that they really care about, and things that are not easy to get through in Sacramento, because obviously you have legislators that are from all over the state and they don't have the same points of view. So I wanted to really bring forward the things that folks here care so much about, like putting justice back into our criminal justice system, which doesn't very well exist. Addressing many of the inequities in income, inequities in education, inequities in opportunity. Trying to stop gun violence, which is obviously rampant, and of course in our area sadly affects our low-income communities more than our other communities. And additionally, continuing California's really incredible leadership on climate protection, climate change. So those were some of my focuses, and making corporations pay their fair share, because California, we're very ambitious, but we have really gone downhill in terms of our ability to fund education, to make colleges affordable, to have our K-12 schools properly paid for, And a lot of that happened with Prop 13. When I went to school here, I'm a native Californian, and when I was a kid, we were in the top 5 per pupil spending. And we're now, in the bottom. And so one of the reasons is that we, for example, when Reagan and Wilson, Republican governors, were governor, there was a much higher rate of income tax on the super rich. We put it back in place with Prop 30, but we eliminated that. So we no longer tax the super rich like we had in the past. And with Prop 13, we weren't collecting the appropriate amounts of property tax. Commercial properties aren't, I'll give you an example later around Contra Costa County, it's the best example. But as a result, we didn't have adequate revenues. And in the recession, it was even worse. So a big priority of mine was to get corporations to pay their fair share. And so those things I mentioned, I feel very proud that I was able to deliver on every one. Not alone, I had an incredible staff. Many people in this area brought my best bills to me, and we just rolled up our sleeves and we worked hard. And it took, very often, many of the things that we accomplished, it took more than one cycle to put that bill through. For example, the bill that required Amazon and other internet retailers to collect sales tax. That took 3 times. But it's now collecting close to $1 billion a year in new revenue for our schools and our vital services. Or take, for example, we had a terrible practice where the guards in our state youth facilities, so where youth were incarcerated, they prevented the youth from going out before the parole board. They used what's called time ads as a way to extend the time these youth served. So what was initially, and they didn't have determinate sentences, they had indeterminate. So what was initially conceptualized as a relatively short incarceration, these young people were staying there 3, 5, 6 years. Ella Baker Center brought me that data and showed me why they were staying so long. So I introduced the bill to stop time ads, and the guards opposed it. It was a union. It took us 3 different times to get that bill finally through, and in the 4.5 years since it's been put in place, the number of youth in those facilities has been cut by half, purely from the lack of use of time ads. But I'll stop there, and we'll ask us good questions, and we'll talk about more.
Definitely. I think it's maybe appropriate to start with one of the more pressing issues in the East Bay. You're both longstanding residents, so you've seen in recent years how we're experiencing, I guess for lack of a better word, a crisis in affordability, housing, displacement. And so I'd like to hear you, both of you discuss that, but also specific things that can be done at the state legislature to remedy it. And I also would like to hear you discuss some of the more recent data looking specifically at the East Bay, whereas we're seeing housing costs in San Jose or San Francisco sort of level out. We're not yet seeing that, I guess, in Oakland or the East Bay. Stuff that I read this morning. But Sandré, why don't you go ahead and maybe you can speak to that and talk about some specific things that you would do with the legislature to address it.
Well, the fortunate part about this election for Senate is that my opponent and I have a record. And this issue of the housing and affordability crisis didn't just start. It is something that has been brewing for some time, ever since the recession. So when the legislature was confronted with this issue of redevelopment, I took a hard stand that we should support the continuation of redevelopment. The redevelopment in the legislature was money that was used for affordable housing, low and moderate income housing, and senior housing. This is the money that funded thousands of affordable housing units in Oakland, Richmond, Berkeley, and the like. And I believe in representative government. I was representing Oakland in the legislature, and I told my colleagues there's no way I'm voting to eliminate these funds. Now, my opponent and I disagree. She voted to eliminate the low and moderate income housing funds that existed in redevelopment. But I challenged all my colleagues to say this was a mistake. And now we find ourselves trying to correct the mistake. And so instead of Sacramento and the state addressing this question, the burden has been shifted back to local government. So every city has either a bonding, housing bonding measure, or they have a rent control measure because we're in crisis. And so I think that one of the reasons I want to go to Sacramento is to address that question and try to get my colleagues in Sacramento to work with local government to make sure that we can make a renewed commitment to the question of affordable housing. It affects the ability of people who have lived in the city for a number of years, who were born in the city, to remain in the city. And so I think that to me, it was a horrible vote to eliminate redevelopment when literally millions of dollars were being spent on affordable housing, senior housing in our area, and just to correct what some saw as a problem with redevelopment in other areas, but it wasn't a problem here in this district. And that's why I fought so hard for it. Mm-hmm. And I would fight for it some more.
So solution.
Well, solution.
If elected.
Well, the solution now, you see all the local governments are trying to develop their own solutions right now. The Alameda County has a housing bond, so obviously, what I say to the voters, yes, let's approve it. All of the cities that have rent control measures, yes, let's approve those. But the state has to do more. We have to look at other ways to be able to creatively help with this situation. It takes a state solution to develop affordable housing in the way it was available before, and the role that redevelopment. So we have to correct what I consider a serious mistake, and a vote that was not sensitive to the people in this district.
Can you speak to maybe a specific plan or a specific plan that you might get behind that maybe is already out on the table?
Well, okay. When we were addressing this question of redevelopment, we had an opportunity to develop some partnerships with developers by assuring that we could address some infrastructure questions, and then we had a partnership where 25–30% of the units were affordable for people. So we have to develop some new incentives for developing affordable housing, and there are a number of ways to do that. First of all, it's going to involve, from the state level, a statewide coalition of urban areas working together to put pressure on Sacramento to make sure that we develop processes that work. Obviously, the local approval measures are going to continue because the need is immediate. We have to develop infrastructure improvement opportunities to roads and utilities to make the construction of new units more possible. So if we go to a developer that is developing units, there's an incentive to build there, and then now the bottom line is much more supported for us to have the ability to insist that there are affordable units in the mix. We have to negotiate these public-private agreements for development that are taking place locally. The councils and the county have to make sure that there are land available at reasonable opportunities, and the trade-off would be to make sure that we have affordable housing also. And so Sacramento can help with laws that address that. And then I think that it's also going to be important as we do all this, that we make sure that we keep in mind the need for energy efficient construction and the contribution to our environment. It is not going to be easy. It's going to be complicated, but there is no alternative because we have 90-year-olds who have lived in the city of Oakland for years that are being put out on the streets. We have families that are working in the city but can't afford to buy in the city. They have to, so we have families working in the city that sleep in their cars because of the question of affordability. And so this is a crisis for many families that are here. And I'm saying that the legislature has some accountability to that problem. And you know, we can't say that the county and the cities are wrong in trying to raise revenue to address this question, and at the same time let the legislature off the hook when we had a vote to keep the money and to develop housing. And that's why I voted to keep it. And respectfully, me and my opponent disagree. She voted to end those fundings.
Nancy, can you speak to the bigger picture?
Yes.
And then legislative solutions, and
Sure.
you can feel free to respond to anything
Sure.
that's been discussed.
Well, a couple things first. I've been an affordable housing activist for a long time. Starting in the late 70s, I was active part of the Berkeley Coalition that put together Berkeley's rent control ordinances. We first put it on the ballot in 75. We only really got our first measure passed in 79, so we failed the first couple. But then subsequent to that, Berkeley improved and enhanced its rent control measures a number of times during the 80s, and I was part of that. Part of the writing of those measures, actively campaigned for those measures, and supported them. Also, when I was on the Berkeley City Council, we accepted some of the last HUD funding for scattered site affordable housing. It's permanently affordable. You can see it if you drive down Sacramento Street on Martin Luther King at Rose next to Fat Apples. So it was scattered site, which we thought was a great thing because it was, you know, not ghettoizing housing. It wasn't putting 100 units in one spot, but it was putting units all through Berkeley. On Shattuck, where Virginia Bakery is, there's some beautiful units right behind there that were part of that scattered site. And you know, Berkeley is as NIMBY as every other town. And we adopted with glee. We were so happy to get federal funding to build that type of housing. And what happened? People should appreciate that they don't always know the history. The reason that Berkeley has district elections is because it was a failed recall. The neighbors in the neighborhoods where we placed that scattered site housing organized and said, you know, if we had our own district representative, we wouldn't have gotten this housing. So that was the onus for district elections in Berkeley, California. But we survived it and went on to get some other funding, did the beautiful housing that's on 6th Street, right in front of the 4th Street area, so 6th between Delaware and Hearst, I think. Anyway, on the redevelopment question, no, I did not support redevelopment as it was structured. I was very, very supportive of using redevelopment funds for affordable housing. But unfortunately, most of the jurisdictions were not using redevelopment funds for affordable housing. And you can find countless examples up and down the state where redevelopment money, which, let's understand what it is. It's when redevelopment, under a redevelopment district, the city managed to take, if this was part of the law, a larger portion of the property taxes that would have otherwise gone to our public schools. And then that larger portion of the property taxes was supposed to be used for these good purposes, but in fact was being used to build NFL stadiums, NBA stadiums, Walmarts, various things like that. And in very, very, very few jurisdictions was it being used for affordable housing. And instead it was hurting the ability to fund our schools. So sadly what happened is we were trying to construct a narrower version of redevelopment, and the statewide redevelopment agencies, backed by some big corporate money, who of course, they didn't really have interest in affordable housing. They wanted still that gravy train of that money for their corporate interests, sued the state, and we weren't able to given the way the lawsuit was structured, and not only the lawsuit, but also the way they wrote a specific initiative, we were not able to put back a more surgical form of redevelopment that would allow for just affordable housing. What we did put into place was an infrastructure financing district, which is cities can use it for affordable housing. I'm not sure why very few cities have taken it up. It only went into effect right at the point that I left the legislature, and I'm going to have to learn better. What's the flaw? Why aren't more cities utilizing it? Now, how do we get to doing better? And then the state has to do better. We are in a crisis, not only in our area, but statewide. Statewide, there is a housing crisis and affordability crisis. Now, when I say a housing crisis, it's more than just an affordable housing crisis. We do not have enough units for people, which is partly why, for the population we have in California, especially not at our job centers, which is why then the prices go up so high. So we need to do both. We need to build market rate housing, more of it, and we need to build affordable housing. And we need to address our homeless problem. And all of those are going to take the state being a much better partner. So some of the specific things that I have attempted to do in the past and will continue to work on, if I'm voters willing in the state Senate, is eliminate some of the obstacles that that delay housing, or make it more expensive. So parking's a great example. By over-requiring of parking, you increase the cost per unit a great deal. Better protecting SROs. There was just a report recently of in Oakland where you've got a lot of owners of our single room occupancy buildings who want to basically, quote unquote, improve the building, which would eliminate it from being able to be used as a single room occupancy. Single room occupancy buildings are very, very important housing for homeless folks and for folks who are marginal. Very, very important housing, and we have lost a great deal of it. We began to lose it after the '89 quake, but we've lost more with this gentrification and these pressures, and I think the state needs to put legislation in place that does more to protect SRO housing. We need to reduce the price of sewer and water hookups if the infrastructure exists, because that's another thing that's affecting the ability to build units. It's especially affecting things like second units. So now in the legislature, just in this last session, they passed some really good legislation to make what's called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or what we call second units, in-laws, whatever, to make them much easier to get permitted. But many jurisdictions charge $30,000 just to do a hookup on, it's like you're going to convert your basement or you convert your attic or something like that into a unit. You're already connected to the sewage system and the water system. Why should there be a $30,000 additional charge? And yet those exist in many, many places up and down the state. So that's another thing we have to do. The state needs to also put its money where its mouth is. If we are so fortunate to have the extension of Prop 30, I believe it's Prop 55, get passed, which is the higher income tax rate on the super rich, then we're going to have some healthy funding for a while. Even if there's a bit of a downturn, we're still going to have decent funding into the state coffers. These under Brown, they've built up a big rainy day fund. We are in a rainy day right now. We are in a rainy day when it comes to housing. And I think that we should use some of that reserve towards assisting local governments, especially for affordable housing and homeless housing.
Thank you. I want to pass the baton down to anyone else.
Yeah, specifically, how do you feel about Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act? And would you be in favor of or opposed to either amending Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act, or getting rid of Costa-Hawkins, for example, entirely? If they were to be amended, how should they be amended? It does seem like when we talk to local politicians, they're always saying, hey, our hands are tied, and they always point to those two key state laws as being a major impediment to affordable housing.
Sure. I think we should untie our hands. I think that we should change the law to make sure that a person who is renting, and 60% of the people in our community are renters, that they are not paying $1,500 one month, and then their rent is raised to $2,500 because of the market climate. I think it's a moral imperative for us to make sure that that does not happen. And I think that's the reason why voters are speaking through the initiative process in just about every major city where they're addressing this question of cost of living increases that are somewhere around 2%, some increases that are reasonable for people to afford. And I just think that we have to examine those laws, modify those laws, and make sure that they prevent the practical displacement of citizens here. I want to just add one question to this redevelopment thing. You know, when they ended redevelopment, the impact on Oakland, there was like 8,000 jobs lost as a result of that. And the impact on Richmond, where they took about $30 million of redevelopment money and leveraged almost $500 million in affordable housing. It was not just a small thing. It was a big thing because and now we're trying to fill the hole there. And I told the governor at the time that if you wanted to address this question of golf courses and other kind of things you thought were abusive about redevelopment, then address those. But cities like Oakland and Berkeley and Richmond, that were using those funds appropriately, we needed to keep those monies in place. And I felt, as a representative of this community, it was my job to fight for that.
So specifically to Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins. So the Ellis Act, my daughter and her wife lived in Oakland until recently, and their landlord raised their rent $600 a month, and it was an owner-occupied unit, so they were allowed to under the rent control law. And what we suspect is that, and we've seen this happen in a lot of places, that if she ended up moving because she couldn't afford that $600 increase, moved to Richmond. So it was she had been paying $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom, she and her wife, in an area where even with the pressures that we're experiencing, you wouldn't expect someone to have to pay $1,800 for. Anyway, what we suspect is that the owner would have, if that wasn't enough to cause her to leave, would have used the Ellis Act and done one of these, I'm going to move my relatives in. And we've seen again and again where when either raising rents or other actions by the owner doesn't drive the tenant out, they then try the Ellis Act eviction. And, except in very few cities, we don't really have the ability to enforce against the Ellis Act, and it's really put onto the tenant. And because the way the Ellis Act is written, the relative must live there for at least a year. Well, we know there's been many, many circumstances where that, maybe they do move the relative in, but that relative doesn't end up living for the period of time that was described. Or maybe the relative never moves in and there's quickly some construction, and then the construction takes a certain period of time, and then the unit's put back onto the market. And it's left to the tenant who lived there to go back and find out whether, was it actually a relative? Did that relative live there for a full year? Was this just one of those flips? And then that tenant has to get a lawyer and take the action to make the enforcement. So, obviously there's problems with the Ellis Act, and we do need to make some amendments to it. We need to fix that. The Costa-Hawkins, the problem there is, when Costa-Hawkins was put into place, it basically allowed for vacancy deed control. And it also set a certain year for which units could not, if anything was built after a certain year, it would not fall under rent control. Well, now we have units that have existed for 15, 20 years that are going to be permanently never able to have the type of rent protections because of Costa-Hawkins. Now, while I think it makes sense economically not to have a rent control in place that would discourage the new construction of housing, after a certain period of time, if we still have these type of cost pressures, it's appropriate for rent control to be able to go into place in those jurisdictions that have it. So, and Costa-Hawkins right now prevents that. So there should be some amendments to Costa-Hawkins because, whether the supporters of the bill at the time, and I was not in the assembly at that time, whether they appreciated the type of long-range effect it was going to have or not, I think now with hindsight we know that its long-range impacts are having, especially in areas like San Francisco, East Bay, San Jose, Silicon Valley, other areas, it's having a very negative impact.
Another issue that's really big in Oakland, the whole, actually your whole district is, Darwin's written a lot about it, the police department. In the last couple, let's see, what's today, 26, so within like a week or so, Nancy, you've got some money from Richmond POA and Oakland POA. I think you got some, in the primary you got some from Richmond POA. So to some progressives, maybe a lot here, they would say, well, Nancy, what's going on? These guys are just creating havoc with this, this young woman, and you're taking, money. Granted, it's like, and also the police, PORAC, I'm not sure what it's Sacramento based police group, $5,000 on the 23rd. And so Richmond and POA and Oakland POA. So what do you say to those people who say, Nancy, what's the deal? These guys are running amok and you're taking money from them. What are you going to do for them? How do you answer that guy, that woman?
Well, I served on the Public Safety Committee in the Assembly the 6 years that I served in office. And when I was on that committee, I frequently voted against things that PORAC or our different police departments supported. So, for example, we've got a classic, and apologies, I'm going to forget the name of the lawsuit and the case where basically there was a ruling that has allowed a lot of police departments and jurisdictions to basically say that when there is investigation of police misconduct, that we have no right to the records. And yeah, Copeland, thank you. Anyway, I oppose that Copeland ruling, and I support making records available. And both Assemblymember Amiano and State Senator Leno introduced bills to make adjustments to the law in order so that these records would be publicly available. I supported those bills. And, so I guess you'd have to ask those different unions, they are unions, why they've chosen to support my campaign. But I will say that within law enforcement and public safety, we know that every single member of law enforcement is not a bad apple. And I respect the right of every worker to be able to collectively bargain. So I have no problem with, our police officers, our public safety officers being able to collectively bargain and then being able to weigh in on campaigns and elections. Though it's not going to affect my positions on things like requiring body cameras, the Copley ruling, or any number of other things that you can see in my history of voting within public safety and on the floor of the Assembly. I also played a role in the Public Safety Committee to basically prevent many bills that would have increased sentencing. And many of these bills were bills that our Police Chief Association, Borak and others support it. And law enforcement, by and large, not always, but basically likes to increase sentencing. And, increasing sentencing is part of why we have the number of incarcerated people that we do in this state. So I've basically opposed almost every single bill that would have increased the sentencing. Finally, I forget what I was gonna, in Berkeley, which has 19, let's see, what year did we pass our ordinance? Pretty early, before 79. We have one of what's considered, and if you were to ask police officers, it's one of the most hated police review processes of any city in the country, because we allowed for the Police Review Commission to make independent investigations, and they could report directly to the city manager and to the council. They did not have to go through the chief. And I've supported that ordinance. It was an initiative, actually, and always had my appointees on the Police Review Commission were always very, very good and not always loved by our officers.
But you admit the timing's kind of, doesn't look good when, it looks like Richmond Police and this is the POA, I realize that.
It is the POA.
But, part of that same department sends Celeste Guap for Florida, and it looks odd. And many people were suspicious. And then it's only within the last couple of days that you're taking money. It's not like an IE where you can say, well, I'm not connected to them. I can't control what the money they give me. They're giving it directly to you. I mean, you don't have to take it. Do you?
I wasn't alerted by these different agencies that they were going to be, or rather, I wasn't alerted by the different associations that they were going to be distributing these funds. It's not like I went and had an interview with them. So the funds did come. We did deposit them. They went directly to my treasurer, because that's, if you look at my different literature and on the website, it has the treasurer's address. But the point is that if we take the situation of Celeste Guap being sent to Florida, which is completely wrong, and I completely support our DA Nancy O'Malley's now prosecuting the officers involved. And I think she needs to get down to who made those decisions, because it would appear that those decisions were really made by the Contra Costa County DA and the chief of police in Richmond. And so when you look at these associations, that's not the leadership of the rank and file is not in the top management of these police departments. Now, there are some people in the rank and file that are obviously bad apples, but they're not the ones who made those decisions.
Yeah.
Did you take any money from any of those same groups, or?
They didn't even interview me. So,
I didn't interview me.
yeah, so the answer is no, but let me just give you my take on this. And I think this is a reason why I think they didn't interview me. First of all, I wrote more laws than any state legislator during my period of time on the issue of human trafficking. I worked with the state attorney general and also worked with the Alameda County DA. And many of the laws, some of the laws that these officers are going to be prosecuted on are laws that I authored in the legislature. I authored the law that said that this young lady should be treated as a victim and not as a criminal. That was my first bill, AB 499, and working in this county to set precedent on this question. And I also authored a bill to deal with these individuals as criminals that were profiteering on the backs of young women and men on the streets dealing with human trafficking. And so if you go to the Attorney General's website and you look under human trafficking, California law, you'll see my name several times, because this is modern day slavery and it is unacceptable. Now, when this is a social justice issue with the police and the community. And so when we were challenged with Oscar Grant being killed, by a BART officer in Oakland, and the community came to me and asked me to do something about it, so I introduced a bill, and that bill called for police accountability in BART. It put in place a citizen review board, and it put in place an independent police auditor. And it was the first bill passed to deal with that in a metropolitan transportation district in California. And it restored some confidence in the community, and certainly to Oscar Grant's family, that we were trying to do something to prevent that from happening again. I think, very frankly, this profiling, racial profiling, is a hate crime. It is a hate crime, and those that are found guilty of it should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Go ahead.
Specific though to the question that you answered, so what would be your position on should police officers have union rights? Should they have collective bargaining rights? Should they even have?
Yeah, of course they should have collective bargaining.
And then Police Officers Bill of Rights, Copley decision, which shields police officer personnel records from any public access whatsoever. What's your position on that?
No, I think that the privacy of someone who has been accused of something, they should have those privacy rights. I think that once a decision is made in a case, that record should follow that officer, and it's germane to them being able to serve in some other police department. I think that
should the public have access?
I think during the adjudication of the process, I think that the laws that govern the privacy of information should be in place. But I do believe that if someone's found guilty of an activity because they're presumed innocent before they have an opportunity to defend themselves, then I think that should operate under our laws. I don't believe that we should smear folks, without them having the opportunity to defend themselves. But I do believe that if an officer is found guilty of excessive force or found guilty of a wrongful shooting, that should be public, and that should follow that officer.
I want to do a quick follow-up on
Yeah.
sex trafficking and human trafficking, because I know you have a history of working on that legislation, but I think it's really clear that the Celeste Guap scandal, for lack of a better word, is really a failure in policy, and a failure on the ground floor with how law enforcement engages sex workers. And then two, as Darwin reported last week, and I'll just repeat it, in last year, Oakland Police Department made 660 arrests in sting operations targeting the sex work industry. 65% of those were adult women who were arrested. So, to go big picture, this is an issue in the East Bay, and what are legislative solutions, and how do you continue your work, and then how do you address it if elected?
Well, first of all, I was proud of the fact that I put in several laws, not one law, but several laws to deal with this issue. And the fact that I started off addressing this question as it related to minors, because I thought that was extremely important, and that the minors that are being trafficked, and arrested and just released, we were doing them a disservice, and we had to rescue these young people. And so I passed a bill that required the police department to treat them as victims, and also to help provide them with counseling and wraparound services. And then I put a bill in that went after the pimps and those that were trafficking the young people. I upped the law on that from $5,000 fines to $20,000. I increased the description of the crime as criminal profiteering, so that there could be asset forfeiture. They can take the assets of those committing the crimes, and then I wrote in the law that those assets will go into services for these young people that were being victimized. I went after the Johns and said that those that are commercially exploiting young people, I raised the fine on them up to $25,000 for having sex with a minor. And those funds will go into services for these young people.
So what's the next step, if elected, to address some of the problems we're seeing now?
I think that if we're going to have more prosecutors, and we know, and largely because of many of the laws that I've written, Alameda County prosecutes half of the human trafficking cases in the state. And what has to happen is that we need to make sure that the young women themselves have an escape, that we have services for them, that we have shelters for them. The next phase is to make sure we want them to help us identify those that are breaking the law. The other reason that I went after human trafficking so heavily during my term was that human trafficking has taken the place of drug trades. So if we're concerned about crime in our neighborhood, the underground economy of crime is being financed by human trafficking. So the people that are breaking in your cars and that are breaking into your homes and that are gun running, they're being financed by this activity. And so it is a comprehensive effort to make sure that not only we rescue these young people who are part of this modern day slavery, but we also attacking the question of financing of crime here. And I think that I'd like to go back to the legislature to move it to the next level, to make sure that there is housing, to make sure that there is a prosecution of those that are committing the crime. And I have to say, parenthetically, that during the time we were having hearings on these several laws that we were putting forward, we had some cooperation from the sex trafficking unit in the Oakland Police Department. I mean, they came to Sacramento and they testified. Gotcha. And I gotta believe that they're outraged by what's happening in the department.
Thanks, Sandré. I want to keep moving forward, but I want to let you, of course, speak to this.
So interestingly, law enforcement supported my colleague, Assemblymember Swanson's bills on the human trafficking. So they didn't have a problem with them, which is a good thing. But what law enforcement sadly has a problem with, I would go further, and that is that an underage woman is a child, it's a girl. And if she is engaged in sex for money, that is not her choice, and she should not be criminalized as a result. And the bills to try to decriminalize underage sex for money have all been opposed by law enforcement. If you take any other circumstance where an adult male, so an overage male, has sex with an underage female, it can be criminal, right? I mean, we have seen cases where consensual, a teenage girl consenting to adult sex, police or the parents have brought prosecution against the adult man because that there's the perception you cannot get consent from an underage woman. So yet we criminalize it. And by virtue of criminalizing it, then we put the young girls in a situation where they're the same as their pimp. So why are they going to have any motivation to, expose or to assist law enforcement in dealing with the people who have put them into this criminal activity if they themselves are also now criminals? Now, there's the argument that, well, we have to do this because we have to get them into the law enforcement, whatever, in order to then give them services and protect them. But you know, in many, many other situations, for example, if a kid's being abused, we don't arrest them, and yet we take them out of that circumstance and we provide them services. So I want to provide services to the girls who are selling sex, because in what all the data shows, that the vast, vast majority of circumstances, probably more than 9 times out of 10, it is not their choice. So we need to be able to give them different options and not criminalize them.
Thank you.
I have a question, since that somewhat interconnects with, the education system and providing, opportunities for youth, inner city youth, that is.
Yes.
So I just want to know both of your, as far as your action plan and delivering the messaging and making things happen on the state level, what is your action plan as far as developing a stronger programming and opportunities for college access to all kids in this area? So what is your concrete plans, and what are you all planning to do to help the children out in this area?
I'm going to be broad, but one of the issues is, right now California doesn't even have mandatory kindergarten, and we certainly do not provide adequate either child care or preschool. So you have many, many children, especially low-income kids, who show up to first grade, have not really been in a setting prior to that where they were given the opportunity to become learning ready, and it immediately almost sets them up for failure. And their parents, to me, I'm not going to blame their parents, because if their parents are in a situation where they've got such a work schedule that how are they going to arrange for that child to go to a part-time kindergarten when they need that kid to be, taken care of all day? Or when the younger kids, pre-kindergarten, if you don't have adequate preschool, subsidized or childcare, very accessible to the parents, what are they going to do? And you've got Oklahoma now has universal preschool for its kids. Its legislature, a Republican state, passed and is funding universal preschool. When I was budget chair, I'm very, very proud that I helped facilitate the largest investment in the expansion of child care and preschool in the state in over a decade. And one of my reasons for running for state senate right now is to put California on a path of universal preschool and mandatory full-day kindergarten, so that kids can be learning ready and they're not put at that disadvantage right away when they start in first grade. Another issue are foster youth. A lot of the girls that are in prostitution were foster youth, and the pimps hang out at the group homes. When you're a foster youth, you are a kid of the state. If that happens, it's our fault. We've got to do much, much better. We need to do better in terms of providing more support for the families so that kids don't have to be put in the foster system. We have to do much less incarceration, and especially for the mothers, because many of our kids in foster care are kids of incarcerated parents. One of the things that I did as budget chair, we provided, it's a federal rule, that if you are non-relative, you are compensated a higher amount for taking in a foster youth than if you're the relative. On this somehow theory that, well, if you're the relative, of course you want to take care of the kid, and why should you be compensated? But what happened then is that many low-income relatives who would otherwise want to take in the child could not afford to. So we equalized in that year in 2014, my last year's budget chair, we put in additional state funds to equalize the payment to a relative to be the same as to a non-relative for the custodial care of the foster youth. On the issue of college readiness, not all kids either have to go to college or need to go to college. It should be an opportunity that's available for everyone. It should be not denied to anyone. But there are great, great jobs for folks that don't require college. For example, welding right now. There's a shortage of welders in our area. welders can be, their normal compensation is a minimum of 75K a year and upwards to 125 to 150 a year, depending on, you know, the type of job and the overtime and such. That we have eliminated from so many of our schools, the type of technical training and that type of skill set that would give people an opportunity to pursue whatever type of job they may want in the future. We need to put those programs back in our, not only in our high schools, our adult schools, and our community colleges. And the state has begun to, but we need to put much more emphasis on that. And then, we've done a pretty good job. We have one of the most affordable community college systems in the entire US, but there should be no fees whatsoever. We need to strip fees from our community college system and fund it to the level so that they can take all the students that are interested, and so that it's set up so that students can get their degrees, students that are also working, that it isn't, if you, what we found is a obstacle for a lot of young people is that depending on their work schedule, the community college course system is set just kind of like high school is. You know, it only can work in the normal 8-hour day or whatever. We need more flexibility. We need more funding to give that type of flexibility. And then finally, our CSU and UC system, we're at the lowest percent of public investment in that system that we have ever been. And you know, there's problems with UC, obviously. There's problems at CSU, but we cannot even begin to address those problems if we fund it to that low level. It is very even hard to say that we're public stewards, that those are public institutions when we fund at that low level. So it was always a priority of mine in the budget to increase the funding to both UC and CSU. And again, in my years, the 2 years as budget chair, we were able to increase the funding to both and put in specifically budgetary language where if either CSU or UC raised tuition, the funding increase that we gave was rescinded. So we prevented the students from getting a tuition increase at the same time we increased the funding to CSU and UC. But we need to do better.
I think Bernie Sanders and President Obama had it right. We should have tuition-free college. As a practical matter, we probably should start with the community college system. I think that's a reasonable way to address that question. But we have to be very concerned about our K-12 schools and the fact that we're in the bottom 10 percentile of funding per pupil expenditures. The fortunate part about this race is that my opponent and I have a record. And during budget debates, when the issue came up during the recession to suspend Prop 98 guarantees so that the legislature could raid the school funds, you know, I said no. She voted to suspend the guarantees to allow them to go in and raid the budget. And the point that I was trying to make at the time is that the reason why voters put that difficulty in place for legislators, that 2/3 hurdle that they had to jump over, is because the people in this state prioritize education money for their schools. And so we shouldn't have suspended the guarantees, and we should have made it very difficult for the legislature to raid those funds. It's one of the reasons why the California Teachers Association has endorsed me, because I stood fast on that. We have a broken prison system. Our prison budget is almost outpacing our higher education budget. We have to fix it. We have to look at the indeterminate sentence. We have to look at mental health problems that some of our prisoners have. We have to look at substance abuse. We have a 70% recidivism rate. We are wasting billions of dollars in this state, money that could be into education. And so I think it's possible for us to make a serious commitment to education if we have the will to do it. And we don't sort of play budget games with these issues. Finally, on this other question of young people, When I was in the legislature, I took 2 years to develop a committee that was the Men and Boys of Color Select Committee on the status of men and boys of color in this state. And the reason why I asked for that committee, and the reason why I took that committee up and down the state of California, talking to young